My name is Mackenzie, and at 29, I never expected my stepsister Heather's wedding would become the battlefield for years of pent-up resentment. As a fashion design assistant to the legendary Amelia Harper, I knew my custom-made dress would turn heads. What I didn't anticipate was Heather publicly humiliating me, calling my gown a knockoff. The silence that fell when Amelia herself appeared behind Heather still rings in my ears. Before I share how my step-siblings' mockery turned into their worst nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you love seeing bullies get their comeuppance. My childhood was pretty normal until I turned 8. That's when my mom lost her battle with cancer, leaving just Dad and me to figure out life together. Richard Reynolds was a good father, an accountant who worked hard to give me everything I needed, if not everything I wanted. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland. Money was sometimes tight, but we were happy in our little world of 2. Everything changed when I was 14. Dad met Kimberly at some corporate event. She was everything my mother wasn't: loud, flashy, and obsessed with status. She came from old money and made sure everyone knew it. Within 6 months, they were married, and suddenly I had 2 step-siblings, Heather, 16, and Brandon, 15. The first time I visited their sprawling mansion in the wealthy West Hills, I felt like I'd stepped into another universe. My entire house could have fit into their entryway and living room. They had a pool, a tennis court, and a garage filled with luxury cars. Brandon had his own game room with every console imaginable, and Heather's closet was bigger than my bedroom. "You can call me Kim," my new stepmother said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "We're going to be one big happy family now." That was the first lie of many. I tried so hard those first few months. I helped with dishes after family dinners. I laughed at their inside jokes even when I didn't understand them. I even asked Heather for fashion advice, hoping to bond with my new stepsister. Oh my God, Heather had snickered when I showed her my favorite outfit, jeans from Target and a sweater Dad had bought me for Christmas. "You actually wear that in public? No wonder you don't have any friends at your school." It was just the beginning of a pattern. When we moved into their mansion, I discovered that in the Reynolds-Montgomery household, appearance was everything. My public school education was deemed insufficient. But instead of sending me to Westlake Prep like Brandon and Heather, Kimberly convinced my father that the local public high school would be more comfortable for me. "She'll adjust better with kids from similar backgrounds," I overheard her telling Dad. The unspoken message was clear: I wasn't good enough for their world. Every family gathering became an exercise in humiliation. Heather and her friends would evaluate my outfits with raised eyebrows and whispered comments. Brandon was slightly less cruel, but just as dismissive, rolling his eyes whenever I spoke about my growing interest in fashion design. "You know that's not a real career, right?" he said once over dinner. "Unless you're, already connected." "Which you're not." Kimberly nodded in agreement. "College is expensive, Richard. Perhaps Mackenzie should consider something more practical, like dental hygiene." My father, who once proudly displayed my fashion sketches on our refrigerator, began to change. Slowly at first. Then more noticeably. He started working later hours, attending more of Kimberly's social functions, and gradually adopting her views on what constituted success. By the time I graduated high school, the gap between us had widened into a chasm. While Heather got a brand new BMW for her graduation, I received a department store gift card and advice to buy something appropriate for job interviews. Despite their disapproval, I applied to the Fashion Institute in downtown Portland. When I got accepted, I waited until dinner to share my news, hoping for at least a flicker of support. "Fashion design?" Kimberly laughed, cutting her steak into precise squares. "Darling, do you know how competitive that field is? And the starting salary is practically minimum wage." "She got a partial scholarship my father offered weekly." "Which means you'll be paying the rest," Kimberly countered. "For a degree that leads nowhere." I worked 3 jobs to put myself through fashion school: barista in the mornings, retail in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a local tailor where I could actually learn practical skills. I rarely saw my family, which honestly became a blessing. When I did visit the mansion for obligatory holiday dinners, Heather would parade around in her designer clothes while Brandon boasted about his business connections through his fraternity at Princeton. "Still making little dresses?" Heather would ask, not bothering to wait for an answer before changing the subject. The worst part wasn't their mockery. It was watching my father fade into the background of his own life. The man who once taught me to stand up for myself now averted his eyes when Kimberly made cutting remarks about my hobby. The night I overheard him agreeing that perhaps I was setting myself up for disappointment, something hardened inside me. I stopped seeking his approval and focused entirely on proving them all wrong. Fashion school was even harder than I'd anticipated. Between classes, assignments, and my 3 jobs, I averaged about 4 hours of sleep per night. My hands were constantly stained with dye, pricked by needles, or burned from the industrial steamers. But for the first time since my mom died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. In my final year, our school hosted a showcase where industry professionals reviewed student work. I'd created a small collection using repurposed vintage fabrics, partly because of my aesthetic, partly because I couldn't afford new materials. While most students flocked around representatives from mass-market brands offering entry-level positions, I noticed a woman quietly examining my pieces, running her fingers along the seams and studying the construction. "You've hand-finished all of these," she said. Not a question, but an observation. "Yes," I replied. "I think details matter, even when they're invisible." She smiled, reaching out her hand. "Amelia Harper, I'd like to talk about your process." My heart stopped. Amelia Harper was a legend, not the kind that adorned billboards or social media, but the kind that dressed first ladies and Oscar winners who valued sophistication over spectacle. Her atelier was small, but internationally respected for impeccable craftsmanship and innovative design. That conversation led to an internship offer. The pay was minimal, but the opportunity was priceless. When I called my father to share the news, Kimberly answered, "An internship? At your age? Mackenzie, when are you going to start a real career?" Brandon already has a job lined up at Montgomery Financial after graduation. I stopped sharing my accomplishments after that. The internship was grueling. Amelia accepted nothing less than perfection, sending me back to restitch seams that were a millimeter off, or to source buttons from specialty shops across town. But unlike my stepfamily, her criticism was never about tearing me down. It was about building something extraordinary. "Excellence isn't accidental," she'd say, unpicking my work and handing it back. "It's 1,000 deliberate choices." Gradually, I moved from fetching coffee to assisting with pattern making. By my 2nd year, Amelia trusted me to execute some of her design concepts. By the 3rd, I was contributing my own ideas to collections. The shy girl from Portland who once trembled when presenting in class was now consulting on designs for celebrities and business leaders. Through it all, Amelia became more than a boss. She became the mentor I desperately needed. She came from a working-class background in Detroit and had built her business through sheer talent and determination. She understood what it meant to be underestimated. "Never let them see you doubt yourself," she advised after I mentioned my family's dismissal of my career. "The fashion industry is brutal enough without bringing your insecurities to work." Our professional relationship evolved into friendship. We shared long dinners after fashion weeks, exchanged books on design theory, and eventually began collaborating as my skills developed. Amelia pushed me to develop my own aesthetic while teaching me the business aspects of fashion that school never covered. "You have something rare," she told me one evening as we reviewed fabric swatches for an upcoming collection. "You understand luxury doesn't have to scream. It can whisper." Meanwhile, my visits home grew increasingly infrequent and uncomfortable. At Thanksgiving dinner 4 years after I'd started working with Amelia, Heather examined my simple black dress with a dismissive glance. "Still shopping off the rack, I see. At least it's slimming." I didn't mention that the dress was a prototype from our upcoming collection, worth more than her entire outfit. "What exactly do you do for this designer again?" Brandon asked, pouring himself another glass of wine. "Like, are you her secretary or something?" "I'm her design assistant," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. I help create the collections. So you make sketches that she turns into actual designs, Kimberly clarified. Misunderstanding deliberately. No, I actually design pieces that end up in our collections. Several pieces from our last season were primarily my work. My father looked up briefly. That's nice, sweetheart. The conversation moved on to Brandon's promotion and Heather's dating life. She was seeing Tyler Sullivan, heir to a real estate development company. My career remained a footnote, my success irrelevant in a world where family connections and inherited wealth were the only currencies that mattered. What they didn't understand was that in my world, the world of fashion that values creativity and craftsmanship, I was building a reputation that couldn't be bought. Celebrities requested my input on their gowns. Fashion editors knew my name. And Amelia, who rarely shared credit, had begun introducing me as her creative partner rather than her assistant. I stopped trying to translate my success into terms my family would value. Instead, I poured my energy into developing my distinctive approach to design, modern silhouettes with unexpected historical references, innovative textiles paired with traditional techniques. My perspective as an outsider became my greatest strength. Amelia recognized this evolution. You're ready for more visibility, she said one day, sliding a contract across her desk. I'm promoting you to associate designer. Your name will appear alongside mine on the next collection. It was more validation than my family had given me in a decade. I signed the contract with a steady hand, no longer the girl desperate for approval. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering. Together with their families. Heather Montgomery and Tyler Sullivan request the honor of your presence. It was addressed to Mackenzie Reynolds and guest. A formal acknowledgement that I was barely part of the family anymore. I stared at it for a long time before texting my friend Jessica. Guess who's getting married? Jessica had been my roommate in fashion school and knew the full saga of my stepfamily drama. Her response was immediate. Please tell me you're not going. I wasn't sure myself. The wedding would be the social event of the season. Tyler's family was even wealthier than Kimberly's, old Portland money with connections throughout the Pacific Northwest. The ceremony would be at the historic Arlington Club, followed by a reception at the Sullivan estate. If I don't go, they'll say I'm jealous or bitter, I replied. And if you do go? They'll find some way to make me feel like I don't belong. The next day at work, I mentioned the invitation to Amelia as we reviewed fabric samples. Family obligations, she said. Examining a piece of hand-embroidered silk. The most complicated designs of all. I'm thinking of sending regrets. We'll be finalizing the spring collection that week anyway. Amelia set down the fabric. Is that the real reason? I sighed. No. I just don't want to spend an entire weekend being treated like the poor relation they're embarrassed to acknowledge. She studied me with the same critical eye she used for evaluating designs. So don't be. Don't be what? The poor relation. You're Mackenzie Reynolds. Associate designer for Amelia Harper. Dress accordingly. A slow smile spread across my face. Are you suggesting I use the wedding as a runway? I'm suggesting you stop hiding your light. If you go, and I think you should, go as yourself. She tapped the invitation. And I have just the design in mind. What followed was unlike any project we'd undertaken together. For client commissions, Amelia was always in charge. For this dress, she treated me as a true collaborator, even deferring to my preferences on several elements. The silhouette should be classic, she mused, sketching rapidly, but with unexpected details that reveal themselves only up close. We selected a midnight blue silk Duchess satin that appeared almost black until it caught the light. The cut was deceptively simple from a distance, a fitted bodice with a subtle sweetheart neckline and a flowing A-line skirt. But the details were extraordinary. Hand-embroidered constellations in silver thread and tiny crystals across the bodice, gradually spreading and becoming more sparse down the skirt, as if stars were falling around me. The Northern Hemisphere summer sky, Amelia explained as we finalized the embroidery pattern, including the Portland sky on the date of your mother's birthday. I blinked back tears. I'd mentioned that date only once years ago. The best designs tell a story that matters to the wearer, she said softly. We worked on the dress after hours. A secret project between regular assignments. Amelia insisted on executing the most challenging elements herself, a rare honor that wasn't lost on the rest of the atelier staff, who watched with curious eyes as the creation took shape. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father called. Our conversations had become increasingly perfunctory over the years. Brief exchanges of surface-level information that never touched on anything meaningful. Kimberly wanted me to check if you're bringing a date to the wedding, he said after our usual pleasantries. I hadn't decided, I replied. Well, they need a final head count for the caterer. He paused. And Kimberly mentioned, she hopes you'll dress appropriately. Many of Tyler's family's business associates will be there. The familiar sting of inadequacy flared briefly. I understand. I wouldn't want to embarrass the family. That's not what I meant. Mackenzie. But it was exactly what Kimberly meant, and we both knew it. The final fitting for my dress came 3 days before the wedding. As I stood before the mirror in Amelia's atelier, even the seamstresses who had worked on the most magnificent gowns for royalty and celebrities fell silent. It's perfect, I whispered, watching the constellations shimmer with every movement. Not quite, Amelia said, bringing out a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of earrings, delicate silver stars with tiny diamonds. Now it's perfect. I can't accept these, I protested. You can and you will. Consider it my investment in a front-row seat to what promises to be an interesting family reunion. She smiled, that razor-sharp smile that had intimidated fashion executives for decades. By the way, I've decided to accept your +1 invitation. You want to come to my stepsister's wedding? Let's just say I'm curious to meet the family you've told me so much about. Her eyes glinted with mischief. Don't worry. I won't arrive until the reception. But I wouldn't miss it for the world. The night before the wedding, Jessica came over to my apartment for moral support and last-minute preparations. You're really doing this, she said, watching me pack my overnight bag for the hotel near the venue. I'm really doing this. And Amelia Harper is coming as your date. As my +1. Yes. I folded the garment bag containing the dress with reverent care. Your stepfamily has no idea what's about to hit them, do they? I thought about Heather's smug superiority, Brandon's dismissive condescension, and Kimberly's thinly veiled contempt. I thought about my father's gradual surrender to their world at the expense of our relationship. No, I said quietly. They really don't. The Arlington Club looked like something from a fairy tale on the day of Heather's wedding. Cascades of white roses and hydrangeas framed the entrance, and a red carpet led guests from their vehicles to the grand doors. I arrived alone as planned, with Amelia set to join later for the reception. The usher, a cousin of Tyler's I'd never met, consulted his list with a slight frown. Reynolds. Ah, here you are. Family of the bride. Stepsister, I clarified. His expression shifted subtly. I wasn't part of the Sullivan circle. Merely an extension of the Montgomery connection. Right this way. The bride's side, 5th row back. Not the family section in front, I noted. Not unexpected, but still a pointed reminder of my status. The ceremony space was a vision in white and gold, with elaborate floral arrangements and a string quartet playing softly. I recognized some of Portland's elite business families, several state politicians, and even a minor European royal whose family had business connections with the Sullivans. Mackenzie, you came. My father approached, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, but with new lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. You look different. Good different or bad different? I asked, embracing him briefly. Just grown up, I suppose. He seemed unsure how to continue. Kimberly's been busy with wedding details. She'll be happy you made it. Another lie we both recognized, but didn't acknowledge. The ceremony is starting soon. I need to go check on Heather, but we'll catch up at the reception. He squeezed my hand and disappeared down a side hallway. The wedding ceremony itself was predictably lavish. Heather looked stunning in a custom Vera Wang gown, a detail she'd made sure everyone knew through multiple social media posts leading up to the day. Brandon served as one of the groomsmen, standing tall and polished in his tuxedo. My father walked Heather down the aisle with Kimberly watching from the front row, dabbing at tears that seemed more about the spectacle she'd orchestrated than any maternal emotion. I sat quietly in my assigned seat, aware of curious glances from nearby guests who were trying to place me in the social hierarchy. My midnight blue dress already stood out among the pastels and neutrals most female guests had chosen. I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I awaited the reception, where Amelia would join me and the real test would begin. After the ceremony, guests were directed to a garden area for cocktails while the wedding party took photographs. I stood alone, nursing a glass of champagne and observing the social dynamics around me. Well, if it isn't my favorite stepsister, Brandon's voice came from behind me. He'd grown into his looks since I'd seen him last, with the confident bearing of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. Almost didn't recognize you. Finally invested in some decent clothes, huh? Hello, Brandon. Congratulations on the family expansion. He clinked his glass against mine. Tyler's all right. Old money, good connections. Heather did well for herself. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Though between us, I give it 3 years tops before she gets bored. Your confidence in your sister's marriage is touching. Just being realistic. His eyes traveled over my dress with new interest. Seriously though, you look good. What are you wearing? Looks expensive. Just something I picked up through work, I replied vaguely. Right, you're still doing that fashion thing with, what's her name? The designer nobody's heard of. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by one of Tyler's aunts, an elegant older woman who stopped mid-conversation with another guest to stare at my dress. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I must ask about your gown. It's extraordinary. Brandon looked surprised as the woman moved closer to examine the embroidery. The constellation work is exquisite, she continued. Is it an Amelia Harper design? It has her attention to detail. Now Brandon looked completely baffled. You know designers, Aunt Catherine. I collect fashion, dear. The good stuff, not just labels. She turned back to me. Am I right? Harper? I nodded, warming to her immediately. Yes, it's one of her newest designs. I thought so. I have several of her pieces. She doesn't design for just anyone. As she walked away, Brandon's expression had shifted from dismissive to confused. Since when do you wear designer clothes? Since I helped design them, I replied. But he was already being called away for more photographs. The cocktail hour continued with similar moments, appreciative glances from those who recognized quality, regardless of label. Contrasted with the familiar Montgomery circle who seemed determined not to notice me at all. Kimberly swept by once, air-kissing near my cheek and murmuring, "So glad you could make it," before being pulled into conversation with Tyler's mother. When guests were finally directed to the reception hall at the Sullivan estate, I discovered I'd been seated at what could only be described as the obligation table, distant relatives, friends plus ones, and people who couldn't be excluded but weren't valued enough for prime placement. We were as far from the head table as physically possible while still being in the same room. I was just taking my seat when a ripple of excitement moved through the room. Heather had changed into her reception dress, a heavily beaded white column with a dramatic train. She moved through the space like a queen, accepting compliments and congratulations with practiced grace. I watched her progress around the room, noting how deliberately she greeted each table, working her way from most to least important. By the time she approached our table, her smile had thinned considerably. "Thank you all for coming," she said to our table collectively before her eyes landed on me. The smile froze. "Mackenzie, you actually came." Her gaze traveled down my dress, something flickering behind her eyes. "And dressed up too. Congratulations, Heather. It was a beautiful ceremony." She nodded absently, clearly distracted by my appearance, which wasn't following the script she'd written in her mind. I should have been underdressed, overwhelmed, out of place. Instead, several guests had already commented positively on my attire. "Interesting choice," she finally said, gesturing to my dress. "Very attention-seeking for a wedding guest." "Not at all. Navy is perfectly appropriate for an evening ceremony." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Right. Well, enjoy the rubber chicken. I requested a special vegetarian option for your table since we weren't sure about everyone's preferences. Translation: we got the cheapest meal option. As she turned to leave, one of her bridesmaids whispered something in her ear while looking in my direction. Heather's expression shifted, and she turned back to me with renewed interest. Actually, Mackenzie, why don't you come say hello to some of Tyler's family? His cousin Eliza was just asking about your dress. The sudden change in attitude was suspicious, but I followed her to a group of expensively dressed women near the dance floor. I recognized Tyler's mother and several women who must have been aunts or cousins based on their similar features. Ladies, this is my stepsister Mackenzie, Heather announced. Mackenzie, you know Tyler's mother, Mrs. Sullivan, and these are his aunts and cousins. I exchanged polite greetings, noting the evaluating looks that wealthy women have perfected over generations. Mackenzie works in fashion, Heather continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She was just telling me about her special designer dress. What was the designer's name again? Amelia Harper, I replied calmly. Right. Someone local, I think. Anyway, Mackenzie was so excited to wear a real designer dress today. One of the cousins, Eliza, I presumed, stepped closer. It's beautiful workmanship. The embroidery is stunning. Nice knockoff, Heather suddenly exclaimed, loud enough that nearby conversations stopped. Come on. Mackenzie, we all know you can't afford Amelia Harper on a shopgirl's salary. The silence spread outward like ripples in a pond. I mean, it's a good copy, Heather continued, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. Very convincing from a distance. Did you find it online? Those Chinese websites are getting really good at fakes these days. My face burned as dozens of eyes turned in our direction. This had been her plan all along, to publicly humiliate me by calling out my supposedly fake designer dress. Heather, that's enough, Tyler's mother said quietly, looking embarrassed. No, it's fine. I'm just impressed by the effort, Heather pressed on, enjoying the spotlight. It must have cost a few $100s, which is a lot for a copy. Though if you're going to pretend, you might as well go all out, right? She reached for a fresh champagne flute from a passing waiter, raising it in a mock toast. To Mackenzie, always trying so hard to fit in. I'm glad you like my design, came a cool, authoritative voice from behind Heather. I made it exclusively for her. Heather spun around to find herself face to face with Amelia Harper, impeccably dressed in her signature minimalist style, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She was instantly recognizable to anyone who actually followed fashion beyond brand names. The midnight blue was Mackenzie's choice, Amelia continued smoothly. She has an excellent eye for color. That's one of the reasons I promoted her to associate designer last year. The champagne flute slipped from Heather's fingers, shattering on the floor as expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension passed across her face in rapid succession. The silence that followed the breaking glass felt eternal. Every eye in the reception bounced between Heather's mortified expression, Amelia's composed authority, and my quiet dignity as I stood between them. Amelia Harper. Mrs. Sullivan recovered first, stepping forward with her hand extended. I'm honored to meet you. I've worn your designs to the Met Gala twice. Catherine Sullivan. Amelia nodded in recognition. The emerald column gown in 2018 and the structured jacket ensemble last year. Both excellent choices. Heather remained frozen, champagne seeping around her white satin shoes as a waiter rushed forward to clean up the broken glass. You're Mackenzie's guest, Tyler's mother continued, connecting the dots. I am, though I'm as much her colleague as her friend these days. Amelia placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Mackenzie has been instrumental in our last 3 collections. The Patterson gown Jennifer Lawrence wore to the Oscars? Primarily Mackenzie's design under my guidance. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The dress in question had been featured in every fashion magazine and generated countless headlines. Kimberly materialized beside her daughter, her social instincts kicking in as she recognized a potential disaster unfolding. Miss Harper, what an unexpected pleasure. We had no idea Mackenzie would bring such a distinguished guest. I'm surprised, Amelia replied coolly. Mackenzie tells me she's mentioned her position at my atelier many times. Kimberly's smile tightened. Of course. But she's always been so modest about her contributions. Perhaps you weren't listening, Amelia suggested, her tone pleasant but her eyes sharp. A common problem in the fashion industry. Everyone wants to look, but few take the time to see. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Brandon had appeared at the edge of the group, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. Tyler, who until this moment had been watching the exchange with bewilderment, stepped forward. Miss Harper, I'm Tyler Sullivan, the groom. I apologize for the confusion. Would you and Mackenzie like to join us at the head table? Tyler. Heather hissed, finding her voice at last. What? Miss Harper is clearly an honored guest. And apparently your stepsister is a significant talent in the fashion world. The seating arrangement seems inappropriate. I caught a flicker of something in Tyler's eyes, not just social smoothness, but genuine disapproval of Heather's behavior. That's very kind, Amelia replied. But we're comfortable where we are. I'm enjoying meeting everyone. She turned slightly. Mackenzie, why don't you introduce me to your father? I see him watching us from across the room. Indeed, my father was standing near one of the columns, his expression stunned as he observed the scene. As we approached, I saw something I hadn't witnessed in years, a flash of the man who had once been my champion, before he surrendered to Kimberly's world. Dad, this is Amelia Harper. My mentor and now my colleague. Richard Reynolds, he said, extending his hand somewhat dazedly. I've heard the name, of course, but I didn't realize, that is, Kimberly always said, that I was an assistant? A shop girl. I supplied. I started as an intern, it's true. I've been promoted several times since then. Associate designer is no small achievement. Amelia added, particularly in an atelier as selective as mine. Your daughter has extraordinary talent, Mr. Reynolds. You must be very proud. My father looked at me as if seeing me for the first time in years. I am, he said softly. I've always been proud of her determination. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine Sullivan, Tyler's aunt who had admired my dress during the cocktail hour. Miss Harper, I hope you'll forgive my intrusion. But I simply must ask, is that celestial embroidery pattern going to be featured in your next collection? It's exquisite. It's a one-of-a-kind piece, actually, Amelia replied. Custom designed for Mackenzie. Though elements of the technique will appear in our fall line. The constellation mapping was my concept, I added, finding my voice strengthening with each interaction. Amelia refined it and suggested the gradual dispersal pattern. As we discussed the technical aspects of the design, more guests drifted toward our conversation. I noticed several women who had earlier ignored me now straining to hear, recognizing that they were in the presence of fashion royalty, not Heather and her off-the-rack Vera wine, but Amelia Harper, whose waiting list for custom pieces stretched 2 years. That emerald silk you're wearing, Amelia said to one woman who had edged into our circle, is from our spring collection 3 years ago. The Viridian series. The woman practically glowed with pleasure at being recognized. Yes, I purchased it in Paris. I've treasured it ever since. The draping on that piece was Mackenzie's work. Amelia continued smoothly. She has a gift for creating movement in structured fabrics. One by one, Amelia identified her designs on various guests, crediting my contributions where appropriate. With each acknowledgement, my position in the room shifted subtly. I was no longer the pitted stepsister, but a recognized talent standing alongside one of fashion's most respected names. From across the room, I caught glimpses of Heather's increasing agitation as the evening progressed. The spotlight she had meticulously arranged for herself was now split, with many of the most influential guests paying court to Amelia rather than the bride. Brandon approached during a brief lull in conversations, looking somewhat sheepish. So, you actually design clothes for real people? Like, famous people? Yes, Brandon. Real clothes for real people with unreal budgets, I replied with a small smile. And that dress you're wearing is actually worth more than your car, Amelia finished for him. Limited edition designs aren't priced for public consumption. He winced slightly. Look, Mackenzie, I may have been a bit dismissive about your career. A bit? Okay, a lot dismissive. In my defense, I didn't really understand what you did. When you said fashion design, I pictured, like, sketching outfits for department store catalogs or something. And now? He glanced around at the influential people who had been circling our conversation all evening. Now I think I severely underestimated you. We all did. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Brandon, it was progress. The most dramatic confrontation came shortly before the cake cutting. I had stepped away to use the restroom when Heather cornered me in the hallway. You planned this, she accused, her perfect makeup now slightly smudged from stress. You deliberately upstaged me at my own wedding. I came to celebrate your marriage, Heather. You're the one who decided to publicly call my dress a knockoff. How was I supposed to know you actually work with Amelia Harper? You've been talking about design work for years, but you never mentioned her specifically. I did, multiple times. Your family chose not to listen. My family? They're your family too. Her voice wavered slightly. Are they? You, Brandon, and Kimberly have spent a decade making sure I know exactly where I stand, outside your charm circle, looking in. That's not fair. You always acted like you were better than us, with your artistic integrity and refusal to network through Dad's connections. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. Well, congratulations, she said bitterly. You've certainly made an impression tonight. Half my wedding guests care more about meeting your boss than celebrating my marriage. Colleague, I corrected gently. Amelia is my colleague now. And she came as my guest because she's also my friend, something you never tried to be. Heather's face crumpled slightly before she reassembled her composure. Whatever. Just try not to completely hijack what's left of my reception, okay? This is still my day. As she turned to leave, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Heather. I called after her. For what it's worth, I really do hope you and Tyler will be happy together. She paused, then nodded once without looking back before returning to the reception. When I rejoined Amelia, she was deep in conversation with Tyler and several members of his family about the fashion industry's sustainability challenges. There you are, she said as I approached. Tyler has been telling me about his interest in investing in American manufacturing. I suggested he might want to hear about the artisan collective you've been developing. Tyler turned to me with genuine interest. Amelia mentioned you're working to preserve traditional handcraft techniques by creating fair wage opportunities for skilled artisans. That aligns perfectly with some of our company's new investment priorities. As I explained my side project, something I'd been developing quietly alongside my work with Amelia, I caught sight of my father watching from nearby. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable. And for the first time in years, it wasn't shadowed by Kimberly's influence. The reception continued with a strange new dynamic. I had become a reluctant celebrity, with guests finding excuses to approach our table. Some were transparently networking, hoping an introduction to Amelia might advance their social standing. Others seemed genuinely interested in learning about the fashion industry beyond the labels they wore. You're handling this well, Amelia observed during a rare quiet moment. Vindication can be its own kind of challenge. I never wanted to embarrass them, I admitted. I just wanted to be acknowledged. Sometimes people need to be embarrassed before they can see clearly. Across the room, the traditional wedding activities continued. Heather and Tyler cut the cake, danced their first dance, and performed all the expected rituals. But there was a subtle undercurrent of tension visible to anyone paying attention. Kimberly's smile had grown increasingly fixed as she watched various influential guests gravitate toward our table instead of the family receiving line. Brandon approached again, this time with a glass of water rather than champagne. Mind if I join you for a minute? I nodded to the empty chair beside me. Amelia excused herself tactfully, moving to speak with a fashion editor she'd spotted near the dessert table. So, Brandon began awkwardly. I've been thinking about all those family dinners where we talked over you when you tried to explain your job. There were quite a few of those. Yeah. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I guess it was easier to assume you were exaggerating than to consider we might have been wrong about you. It wasn't about being wrong or right, Brandon. It was about basic respect. He nodded slowly. I get that now. Or I'm starting to. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I was jealous. Jealous? Of what? Your certainty. You always knew exactly what you wanted to do, even when everyone told you it was impossible. I followed the path laid out for me: Westlake Prep, Princeton, Montgomery Financial. I never had to fight for anything, but I never really chose anything either. The admission stunned me. From the outside, Brandon had everything: privilege, opportunity, family support. It's not too late to choose your own path, I suggested. Maybe. He looked thoughtful. Anyway, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For being a jerk. For not standing up for you when Heather and Mom were at their worst. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my father, who seemed to have finally broken free from Kimberly's side. May I have a moment with Mackenzie? He asked Brandon, who nodded and discreetly left. My father took the vacated seat, looking more uncertain than I'd seen him in years. I owe you an apology, he began without preamble. Many apologies, actually. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He took a deep breath. I've been watching you tonight, seeing how these people respect you, how that remarkable woman values your talent. And I realized I can't remember the last time I told you I was proud of you. It's been a while, I acknowledged quietly. When your mother died, I promised her I'd always support your dreams. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that promise. I let Kimberly's values become my values. I convinced myself I was helping you by pushing you toward more practical choices. You were trying to protect me from disappointment. No, I was protecting myself from the difficulty of standing up for you. It was easier to go along with Kimberly than to fight for what I knew was right. He reached for my hand. I failed you, Mackenzie. And I've missed so much because of it. My eyes burned with unshed tears. I missed you too, Dad. I'd like to change that, if you'll let me. I want to see your work, understand your world. It's clear you've built something remarkable without any help from me. I'd like that, I said, squeezing his hand. Our moment was interrupted by a commotion near the head table. Heather's voice had risen above the music and conversation, her words slightly slurred, suggesting she'd had more champagne than was wise. It's my wedding. My special day, she was saying to Tyler, who looked mortified. Heather, please lower your voice, he urged, glancing around at the watching guests. Why should I? Everyone's already more interested in Mackenzie and her fancy designer friend than in us anyway. My father sighed. I should go help with that situation. Actually, came Amelia's voice as she rejoined us. I think I may have contributed to this particular drama, so I'll come with you. We approached the head table together, where Kimberly was now attempting to calm her daughter while Tyler stood by looking increasingly uncomfortable. You planned this, Heather accused as soon as she saw me. You knew exactly what you were doing, bringing her here, wearing that dress. That's enough, Heather, my father said firmly, surprising everyone, including himself. Mackenzie has every right to bring a guest to the wedding. A guest you explicitly allowed on the invitation. I didn't know her guest would be Amelia freaking Harper. Tyler placed a restraining hand on Heather's arm. You're making a scene, sweetheart. I don't care. This was supposed to be about us, about me. And it has been, I assured her. No one is trying to take away from your day. Bullshit. I saw you talking to Tyler's family about investment opportunities. At my wedding. Kimberly intervened, her social damage control instincts overriding everything else. Heather, darling, you've had a lot of champagne. Let's take a moment to freshen up. As Kimberly led Heather away, Tyler turned to us with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. Wedding stress, I suppose. Perfectly understandable, Amelia replied smoothly. Big events bring out big emotions. Tyler's eyes, however, had a calculating look I recognized from business negotiations. I have to ask, though, did Heather know who you were before today, Mackenzie? About your actual position? I've mentioned it many times over the years, I admitted. Whether she chose to believe it is another question. I see. His gaze shifted toward the restrooms where his new wife had disappeared. And the invitation to you today? Was that sincere? My father looked confused. But I suddenly understood what Tyler was asking. You should discuss that with Heather. I intend to. He straightened his tie. If you'll excuse me. As Tyler walked away, my father turned to me with a questioning look. What was that about? I think, Amelia observed, the groom just realized his bride invited Mackenzie specifically to humiliate her, not knowing the tables would be turned. Surely Heather wouldn't, my father began, then stopped himself. Actually, that sounds exactly like something she might do. The revelation hung between us, another confirmation of how my stepfamily had viewed me all these years, not as someone to be proud of, but as someone to be put in her place. The wedding reception began winding down shortly after. Heather and Tyler emerged from their private discussion looking strained, completing their hosting duties with mechanical politeness. Kimberly circulated with increasing desperation, trying to salvage the social connections she valued so highly. As guests began to depart, Brandon approached me one last time. So, this is weird. But, could I maybe see your studio sometime? I'd like to understand what you actually do. It was the first genuine interest he'd ever shown in my life. I'd like that, Brandon. Amelia and I made our own graceful exit, exchanging contact information with several interested parties and accepting warm farewells from Tyler's family. Well, Amelia said as our car pulled away from the Sullivan estate, that was more entertaining than most runway shows I've attended. I leaned back against the leather seat, emotionally exhausted. I never expected any of this. Didn't you? You wore a one-of-a-kind Amelia Harper original to an event where you knew you'd be underestimated. Part of you wanted this confrontation. Maybe. I conceded. But not the public drama. Sometimes recognition requires a little drama. She patted my hand. Get some rest. Monday morning we need to focus on the fall collection. Tonight was just an interesting detour. As we drove through the darkened streets of Portland, I realized something profound had shifted. For years, I'd been seeking validation from my stepfamily, measuring my worth against their approval. Tonight had proven I didn't need it anymore. The respect I'd earned in my professional life was more meaningful than their acceptance ever could be. Yet, paradoxically, by finally stopping my quest for their approval, I'd begun to reclaim something I'd thought was lost forever, my relationship with my father. The weeks following Heather's wedding brought changes I could never have anticipated. My phone, usually silent except for work communications, suddenly contained messages from family members who had previously ignored my existence. My father called first, asking to have lunch. We met at a small bistro near my studio. The awkwardness of our estrangement gradually melting as he asked thoughtful questions about my career and listened, really listened, to my answers. I'd like to see where you work, he said as we finished our meal. If that's allowed. I'd have to check with Amelia, but I think that could be arranged. The tentative reconnection with my father was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Years of hurt couldn't be erased overnight, but each conversation built a new foundation, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Brandon's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. 2 weeks after the wedding, he visited the atelier, walking through with wide eyes as I explained our design process. This is nothing like I imagined, he admitted. Watching the skilled pattern makers and seamstresses transform two-dimensional concepts into wearable art. It's like a laboratory for clothes. That's not a bad analogy, I laughed. We experiment, test hypotheses, and refine until we achieve the desired result. And you're good at it. Really good. Thank you, Brandon. I quit Montgomery Financial. He blurted suddenly. You what? After the wedding. I realized I hated it, the politics, the emphasis on family connections over actual ability. He looked both terrified and exhilarated. I've applied to graduate programs in sustainable business. I've been reading about ethical investment and corporate responsibility. Wow, Brandon. That's a big change. Your friend Amelia said something that stuck with me. About how excellence isn't accidental but 1,000 deliberate choices. I want to make my own choices now. I hid my surprise that he and Amelia had apparently had a meaningful conversation amidst the wedding chaos. She'll be pleased to hear she made an impression. Heather was another story entirely. 3 weeks after the wedding, the society pages announced that Tyler Sullivan had filed for annulment, citing fraud and misrepresentation. The rumors swirling through Portland's elite circles suggested he had discovered Heather had deliberately cultivated relationships with people solely for their social utility, including inviting undesirable guests to her wedding specifically to humiliate them in front of her new husband's family. I took no pleasure in her public humiliation, recognizing the pattern of behavior that had shaped my own experiences with her. Heather had always used people as props in the narrative she constructed about herself. Tyler, raised with old money values that prized discretion and integrity, had apparently drawn a line when he realized the extent of her manipulation. Kimberly, predictably, went into social hibernation, too embarrassed by the scandal to maintain her usual rounds of charity luncheons and committee meetings. My father reported that she had become increasingly bitter, blaming everyone but herself for the family's sudden fall from grace among the elite. Meanwhile, my professional life entered a new phase. The week after the wedding, Amelia called me into her office. "I've been thinking about succession planning," she said without preamble. "I'm not getting any younger, and this business needs to continue beyond me." "Amelia, you're not even 60. Irrelevant. Fashion is forward-looking by definition." She slid a folder across her desk. "This is a 5-year plan to transition you from associate designer to partner, with the eventual goal of you taking over primary creative direction while I focus on the business aspects." I stared at the folder, speechless. "Your work at the wedding was flawless," she continued. "Not just the dress, but how you handled yourself. Our industry requires both creative vision and diplomatic skill. You demonstrated both. I don't know what to say. Say yes, obviously. Though take the weekend to review the details if you must." That conversation set in motion a whirlwind of changes. My name began appearing alongside Amelia's in fashion publications. I took on more client meetings, developing relationships with the celebrities and socialites who formed our exclusive clientele. Our fall collection, featuring elements inspired by the constellation embroidery from my wedding dress, received critical acclaim. For months after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor at the atelier. Tyler Sullivan, looking more relaxed than he had on his wedding day, requested a few minutes of my time. "I owe you an apology," he said once we were seated in the small conference room. "I had no idea about Heather's intentions when she invited you to our wedding. You don't need to apologize for her actions." "Perhaps not, but I feel responsible nonetheless. It was my family she was trying to impress by humiliating you." He looked genuinely remorseful. "When I realized what she'd planned, that she'd invited you specifically to mock your career in front of people she thought would matter to me, I knew I couldn't stay married to someone with that kind of cruelty in them. I'm sorry things ended that way. I'm not, to be honest. Better to discover someone's true character early." He hesitated. "Actually, I came here with a business proposition as well. My family's foundation is establishing a scholarship program for emerging designers from disadvantaged backgrounds. We'd like you to be on the selection committee." The irony wasn't lost on me, being asked to help identify and support talented individuals who, like my younger self, needed opportunity more than charity. I'd be honored. As Tyler left, Amelia appeared in the doorway, one eyebrow raised questioningly. "Interesting visitor. He wants me on a scholarship committee for young designers. Seeking absolution through good works. Still, it's a worthwhile cause." She studied me carefully. "You've come a long way from the nervous intern who couldn't make eye contact during interviews. I had a good teacher. You had good instincts. I merely provided direction." 6 months after the wedding, I launched a small capsule collection under my own name, with Amelia's blessing and backing. At the preview event, I looked out at the assembled fashion editors, buyers, and influencers and spotted a familiar face in the back row, my father, beaming with unrestrained pride. Beside him, surprisingly, sat Brandon, who had started his graduate program and developed a genuine interest in the business aspects of fashion. He had even begun advising me on sustainable supply chain practices, finding his own place in an industry he'd once dismissed. Heather and Kimberly were conspicuously absent from my life, having retreated into their own world of grievances and recriminations. I had made peace with their absence, understanding that some relationships cannot be salvaged when built on such uneven foundations. As the models displayed my designs on the runway, modern architectural pieces with the subtle, meaningful details that had become my signature, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the insecure stepsister desperate for approval to the confident designer celebrated for my unique vision. The wedding that was meant to be Heather's triumph had become, instead, a turning point in my own story. Not because of the public vindication, satisfying though it had been in the moment, but because it had forced a reckoning long overdue. It had shown me that I had already succeeded on my own terms, without the validation I had craved from my stepfamily. After the show, surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations, my father pulled me into a tight hug. "Your mother would have been so proud," he whispered. "I'm sorry she missed this." "I'm sorry, I almost did too." "You're here now," I replied, returning his embrace. That's what matters. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I looked at a photograph on my desk. Not a family portrait, but a picture of me and Amelia in the atelier. Surrounded by sketches and fabric swatches, both of us intent on bringing beauty into being. It was, I realized, the truest image of my journey. Success wasn't about proving my stepfamily wrong. It was about proving myself right, about my passion, my talent, and my worth. The validation I had sought for so long had always been within me, waiting to be recognized and claimed. Have you ever had to stand up to people who underestimated you? How did you find the strength to believe in yourself when others didn't? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if my journey from underestimated stepsister to respected designer resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that success is the best revenge. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the most powerful validation always comes from within.